Tiu Chin. My parents demanded I sign over my house to my older brother. When I refused, they forged my deeds. Ban Dike, Bomiu Ka Tua Kai Jin Wang Na Cho Entree. Kai Tua Tu Choi, Ho De Lam Jia So Du Qua Tua. Don't thumbnail text. My parents demanded I sign over my house to my older brother. When I refused, they forged my deeds. So I called the cops and exposed their lies. Now they're begging for mercy. Ban Dike, Bomiu Ka Tuan Wang Na Cho An. Kai Tua Tu Choi, Ho Lam Jia So Du. The La Tua Bao Kan Sat Ba Vok Tran Loi Noi Doi, Gio Ho Dang Ka Xian Su Thuong Zat. My parents demanded I sign over my house to my older brother. When I refused, they forged my deeds. So I called the cops and exposed their lies. Now they're begging for mercy. I am Calvin. I am 38 years old, and I make my living as a systems architect for a large IT infrastructure firm. If you do not know what that means, it is actually quite simple. My entire life, my entire career, is built on finding weak points. I look at massive, complicated networks, identify where the foundation is rotting, where the security is failing, and I build firewalls to keep the system from collapsing. I deal in logic. I deal in predictable outcomes. You put the work in, you secure the perimeter, and the system runs smoothly. It is a shame that human beings, especially the ones you share DNA with, do not operate under those same logical rules. If my life is a system, then the foundational error, the original glitch in the code, was being born second. My brother, Bradley, is 41 years old. In the eyes of my parents, Clifford and Barbara, Bradley is not just a son. He is an investment. He is the golden heir, the firstborn, the one meant to carry the family legacy into some imaginary upper-class stratosphere. I, on the other hand, was what therapists call the glass child. I was there, but I was transparent. I was the backup generator, only acknowledged when the main power grid failed. This dynamic was not subtle. It was not something I only realized after years of expensive therapy. It was the absolute, undeniable baseline of my existence since I was old enough to form memories. Let me give you a very clear picture of how things worked in our household. When Bradley turned 16, my parents threw a massive barbecue. In the middle of the party, my father, Clifford, handed Bradley the keys to a brand new sedan. Not a used clunker, not a hand-me-down. A brand new car, fully paid off, insurance covered. My father stood there with his chest puffed out and announced to all our relatives that a man needs a reliable vehicle to drive his ambition forward. 2 years later, I turned 18. I had been working night shifts at a greasy local diner since I was 15, smelling like stale fry oil just to save up for college application fees. On the morning of my 18th birthday, I came downstairs. My mother, Barbara, handed me a birthday card. Inside was a $20 bill and a monthly bus pass. There was no speech about ambition. There was just a casual reminder to make sure I took the trash out before I walked to the bus stop. Whenever I questioned this, whenever I pointed out the glaring, canyon-sized gap in how we were treated, I was met with the same toxic family philosophy. My father would sit back in his recliner, fold his hands, and say, "Calvin, the firstborn carries the family forward. Bradley needs a head start to establish the family name. Your role is to be independent and support him if he needs it." I was not a person to them. I was a supporting beam for the grand monument they were building out of Bradley. They poured every ounce of their emotional and financial capital into him, completely blind to the fact that Bradley was a terrible investment. He was arrogant, lazy, and completely obsessed with maintaining the illusion of being a high-net-worth individual, even when his pockets were entirely empty. Once I understood the rules of the game, I simply stopped playing. I packed my bags the day after my high school graduation, took out a mountain of student loans, and moved out. For 15 years, I ground my bones into dust. I worked 60-hour weeks. I ate ramen noodles while my coworkers went out for expensive steaks. I lived in cramped, damp apartments with roommates who never washed their dishes. I climbed the corporate ladder rung by painful rung, earning every single promotion, every certification, and every dollar that entered my bank account. I did not ask my parents for a dime. I did not ask them for advice. I built my own foundation from scratch. And finally, at 38, it paid off. I bought my own house. It was a beautiful, solid 3-bedroom property in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It needed some updating, but it had good bones. For 6 months, I spent every weekend and every evening after work tearing up old carpets, sanding down hardwood floors, and painting walls. I poured my sweat into that house. Every plank of wood I laid down, every light fixture I wired myself, was a testament to my autonomy. It was the first time in my life I had a space that was entirely, unequivocally mine. My pride and joy, however, sat in the driveway. A 1969 Dodge Dart. I bought it as a rusting shell and spent 2 years bringing it back to life. I rebuilt the engine, polished the chrome, and painted it a deep, metallic green. That car, much like the house, was a physical manifestation of my healing. It was proof that something broken and discarded could be made powerful again. When the house was finally ready, I made the mistake of calling my parents. I thought, foolishly, that maybe this once, they would be proud. I told my mother I had purchased a home. There was a long pause on the phone. Then she simply said, "Oh. Well, I hope you didn't take on a mortgage you cannot handle. Bradley was just telling us about a big commercial real estate deal he is looking into." I hung up the phone, feeling nothing but a cold, familiar emptiness. I should have known better. About 2 months after I moved in, my parents invited themselves over. They called on a Sunday morning and said they were in the neighborhood and wanted to see the place. I agreed, mostly out of a lingering, pathetic sense of obligation. When Clifford and Barbara walked through my front door, they did not bring a housewarming gift. They did not smile. Instead, they moved through my home like building code enforcers looking for violations. My father tapped on the walls, muttering about amateur drywall work. My mother ran her fingers over my new kitchen countertops, sighing heavily and asking if it did not feel terribly lonely for a single man to occupy so much space. We eventually sat down at the dining room table. I poured them coffee, trying to keep the atmosphere civil. But the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The lighting above the table suddenly felt harsh, like an interrogation room. Clifford cleared his throat, laced his fingers together, and leaned forward. He gave me that stern, patriarchal look he used to give me when I was a child. "Calvin," my father said, his voice slow and deliberate. "Your mother and I have been discussing your living situation. We have looked at the layout of this property, the neighborhood, the school districts. We think it makes more sense for Bradley to take over this property." For a full 10 seconds, I did not breathe. I simply stared at him. I tried to process the words, running them through my logical brain, trying to find a translation that made sense. "Take over," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "It is just the practical solution," my mother chimed in, waving her hand as if we were discussing switching seats at a restaurant. "Bradley and Brenda have young Carter to think about. They need a yard. They need 3 bedrooms. You are a single man, Calvin. You do not need a fortress. You could easily move into a nice little condo. We can help you transfer the deed over to your brother by the end of the month." Before my brain could even formulate a response to this sheer, unadulterated madness, the front door clicked open. I had left it unlocked. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Bradley strolled into my kitchen. He was wearing an expensive, tailored blazer that I knew for a fact he could not afford. He grabbed an apple from my fruit bowl, took a bite, and leaned against the counter, looking at me with absolute arrogance. "Don't make a big deal out of it, little brother," Bradley said, chewing loudly. "It keeps the family wealth consolidated. I will even let you keep some of your furniture in the garage until you find a smaller place." I did not yell right away. My background in IT has taught me that when a system is facing a catastrophic failure, panicking only makes it worse. You have to isolate the threat. I stood up from the dining table. I looked at my father, then my mother, and finally at Bradley, who was still casually eating my food in my kitchen. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, flat, and completely devoid of emotion. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls in a dramatic display of shock. "Calvin, how dare you speak to us? This is my house," I cut her off, my volume rising just a fraction, but enough to rattle the coffee cups on the table. I bought it with my money. I pay the mortgage. There is no family wealth being consolidated here because you did not contribute a single red cent to this property. End of discussion. All of you, get out of my house right now. Bradley rolled his eyes, tossing the half-eaten apple into my clean sink. Always so dramatic. You are being completely unreasonable, Calvin. We are just trying to optimize the family's assets. If you do not walk out that front door in 5 seconds, I am calling the police and having you removed for trespassing, I stated, pulling my phone from my pocket. They saw the absolute dead seriousness in my eyes. The patriarch routine faded from my father's face, replaced by a scowl of deep offense. They gathered their coats in silence and marched out, muttering about my selfishness. When the door clicked shut, I locked it. I leaned against the heavy wood, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled out my phone and called my childhood best friend, Dalton. Dalton had lived next door to us growing up. He had a front row seat to the circus that was my family for 20 years. You are not going to believe the level of delusion I just witnessed, I told him when he picked up. I recounted the entire conversation. Dalton let out a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. Calvin, I am going to be honest with you. I am shocked, but I am not surprised. Bradley has always believed that what is yours is actually his. Remember when we were 17 and you bought that vintage guitar with your summer job money? Bradley threw a fit until your parents forced you to let him borrow it, and he pawned it 2 weeks later. Dalton was right. As I paced my living room, my analytical mind started breaking down my parents' behavior. It was classic behavioral economics. It was the sunk cost fallacy on a massive, emotional scale. My parents had invested decades of money, praise, and social standing into making Bradley the success story of the family. If Bradley failed, it meant their investment failed. It meant their parenting failed. To protect their own fragile egos, they had to keep propping him up. And now, they expected me to become a donor organ to keep their golden child alive. The physical confrontation was over, but the psychological warfare was just beginning. In toxic family dynamics, when the main abusers fail to break your boundaries, they send in the flying monkeys. The extended family members who are brainwashed into doing the dirty work. The next morning, I woke up to a 5-minute voicemail from my Aunt Beverly. Beverly was my mother's sister, a woman whose entire personality revolved around country club gossip and judging people's lawns. I hit play while I brewed my morning coffee. Calvin, I am absolutely appalled by your behavior. Her shrill voice echoed through my quiet kitchen. Your mother called me in tears last night. How can you be such a selfish, materialistic hoarder? Your brother is trying to raise a family, trying to carry on the family name, and you're hoarding a massive house all to yourself like some greedy dragon. Family shares, Calvin. A good Christian man sacrifices for his brother. You need to apologize and sign those papers, or I swear to God, you will be cut out of this family entirely. I deleted the voicemail. But that was just the start. Throughout the week, my phone became a toxic waste dump of notifications. My mother sent daily, multi-paragraph text messages attempting to drown me in emotional blackmail. She talked about the pain of childbirth, about how she sacrificed her youth to raise me, about how my refusal to hand over my house was giving my father heart palpitations. Bradley took a different approach. He took to Facebook. He posted vague, passive-aggressive status updates designed to paint himself as a victim. It is truly heartbreaking when the people you share blood with turn their backs on you in the name of greed. Family should be everything. Feeling betrayed today. Naturally, a dozen of my cousins and aunts commented underneath, sending prayers and asking who had wronged him. 10 years ago, this coordinated attack would have broken me. I would have felt crushing guilt. I would have doubted my own sanity and eventually caved in just to make the screaming stop. But not the 38-year-old me. I treated their harassment the same way I treat a malware attack at work. I did not engage. I did not argue. I simply documented. I created a secure, encrypted folder on my cloud drive. I took screenshots of every single text message, every Facebook post, and saved every voicemail. I was building a paper trail, piece by piece. Things remained in this state of digital Cold War for about 2 weeks. I thought perhaps they had realized I was a brick wall and had given up. I should have known that entitlement, when mixed with desperation, does not just fade away. It escalates. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I had finished a massive server migration at work early and decided to head home around 3 o'clock to enjoy a quiet afternoon. As I pulled my Dodge Dart into my driveway, I noticed a strange, beat-up white van parked on the street in front of my house. A magnetic sign on the side read "Fast and Cheap Contracting." A cold spike of adrenaline hit my stomach. I walked up to my front porch and saw that my front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently, stepping into the hallway. The sound of heavy boots and loud, arrogant voices drifted from my living room. I turned the corner and froze. Standing in the middle of my living room was Bradley. Next to him was his wife, Brenda, holding a clipboard and pointing an arrogant finger at the wall separating my living room from the kitchen. Their 10-year-old son, Carter, was currently jumping up and down on my expensive, cream-colored sofa with his shoes on. And standing next to Brenda was a man in a dusty flannel shirt, holding a tape measure. "Right here," Brenda was saying in her nasally, commanding tone. "This whole load-bearing wall needs to be smashed down. I need an open concept for entertaining. And those hardwood floors have to go. They look so cheap. We will put down gray vinyl." Bradley nodded in agreement, his arms crossed. "Make sure you get the estimate to me by Friday. We want to start demolition next week." "What in the absolute hell is going on here?" My voice boomed through the room. The contractor jumped. Brenda dropped her pen. Bradley spun around, looking mildly annoyed rather than caught. "Calvin, you are home early," Bradley said casually, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Brenda and I are just getting some quotes. We figured we would save time and have the contractor look at the place before the paperwork is finalized." "How did you get in my house?" I demanded, my fists clenching at my sides. Brenda rolled her eyes and sighed. "Your mother gave us the spare emergency key you left with her. Honestly, Calvin, relax. We are not breaking anything yet. We are just planning." "Get off my couch," I snapped at the kid, Carter, who simply stared at me and kept jumping. I turned to the contractor, who looked incredibly uncomfortable. "Sir, I am the sole owner of this property. I did not authorize any estimates, and I will not be paying you. Please pack up your tools and leave my property immediately, or you will be named in the police report I am about to file for breaking and entering." The contractor didn't say a word. He grabbed his tape measure and practically sprinted out the front door. I turned my fury onto Bradley and Brenda. "I told you to stay out of my life. You used a key meant for medical emergencies to trespass into my home to plan a demolition of a house you do not own. You have exactly 10 seconds to get out of my sight." Brenda grabbed Carter's hand, huffing indignantly. "You are completely unhinged, Calvin. You need psychiatric help." They marched out, leaving a trail of muddy footprints on my floor. The second they were gone, I called a locksmith. Within 2 hours, every single lock on my doors was replaced with high-security deadbolts. But the feeling of violation lingered. My sanctuary had been breached. The war had officially moved from my phone screen to my front porch. Thank you for following the story this far. If you empathize with what Calvin is going through, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you so much. The physical boundary of my house had been breached, but the most deeply personal attack happened 3 days later. It was a beautiful, crisp Saturday afternoon. I had spent the morning in my driveway, carefully washing and waxing my 1969 Dodge Dart. That car was not just a vehicle to me. It was a symbol of my resilience. I had spent 2 years of my life sourcing original parts, rebuilding the carburetor, and sanding down the rusty body panels until my hands bled. I painted it a deep, metallic green, and applying the wax was a therapeutic ritual for me. I had left the car in the driveway to cure in the sun while I went inside the house to grab a fresh microfiber towel. I was in the kitchen for exactly 2 minutes. As I was pouring myself a glass of water, I heard it. It was a sickening, high-pitched screech. The unmistakable sound of a sharp rock being dragged violently across metal. My heart stopped. I dropped my glass in the sink and sprinted out the front door. Standing next to my car was Carter, my 10-year-old nephew. He was holding a jagged piece of landscaping stone in his right hand. He was looking at me with a blank, almost amused expression on his face. And there, running along the entire passenger side of my pristine, fully restored Dodge Dart, was a deep, jagged white gouge. It went all the way from the front fender, across the heavy metal doors, completely destroying the clear coat and the base paint, right down to the primer, ending at the taillight. A wave of blind, hot fury washed over me. I did not see a child. I saw a vandal actively destroying thousands of hours of my hard work. I charged forward, grabbed the rock out of his hand, and gave him a firm shove on the shoulder. It was not a punch, but it was enough to knock him off balance. He fell backward onto the grass and immediately began screaming as if he had been struck by lightning. Within seconds, the doors of a car parked down the street flew open. I had not even noticed they were there. Bradley, Brenda, and my parents came sprinting across my lawn. They must have been doing a drive-by to spy on my house. "What is wrong with you?" Brenda shrieked, falling to her knees and scooping Carter into her arms. "You just assaulted a child. He is 10 years old. Look at my car." I roared, my voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. "Look at what your out-of-control kid just did." Bradley stepped up to me, puffing out his chest, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "It is just a stupid piece of metal, Calvin. He is a kid. Kids play. You do not put your hands on my son over a car." My father, Clifford, stepped between us, holding his hands up in his usual patronizing peacemaker pose. "Calvin, calm down right now. You are acting completely unhinged. You cannot prioritize your materialistic possessions over your own flesh and blood. You owe your nephew an apology." I looked at my father, then at my mother, who was glaring at me with absolute disgust. I felt something inside of me snap. The final thread of my familial patience completely severed. They were defending a child who had just caused thousands of dollars in property damage, simply because that child belonged to the golden heir. "Get off my property," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "If any of you ever set foot on my driveway again, I will have you arrested. Leave." I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the wall, running the calculations in my head. I knew exactly how much a professional paint matching and blending job would cost for a classic car. The next morning, I picked up my phone and called Bradley. He answered on the second ring, his tone dripping with arrogant condescension. "Are you calling to apologize, little brother?" "I am calling to give you an invoice," I said smoothly. "The damage your son caused to my car will cost $3,500 to repair. I expect a wire transfer by the end of the business day." Bradley laughed. It was a loud, barking laugh. "You are out of your mind. Take it to a body shop, have them buff it out for $50. I am not paying you $3,500 because you are overly sensitive about a scratch. This is not a negotiation, Bradley. You are legally responsible for the damages your minor child causes. Pay the $3,500, or I am filing a police report for vandalism." "Do whatever you want, you paranoid freak. No cop is going to care about a family dispute," Bradley sneered, and he hung up the phone. He severely underestimated my commitment to protocol. An hour later, I walked through the double doors of the local police precinct. I sat down with a desk sergeant and laid out my case. I did not bring up the family drama, the house, or the inheritance. I kept it strictly factual. I provided photographs of the deep gouge on the vehicle. I provided the security camera footage from my neighbor's doorbell camera that captured the entire incident, clearly showing Carter dragging the rock and Bradley refusing to provide insurance information. The sergeant took my statement, filed an official report for destruction of property, and handed me the incident number. From the precinct parking lot, I called my auto insurance provider. I filed a comprehensive claim, gave them the police report number, and explicitly named Bradley and Brenda as the liable parties, providing their home address. I knew my insurance company's subrogation department would hunt them down for every single penny. When I got home, I realized a locked door was no longer enough. I drove to the electronics store and spent $1,200 on a top-tier security system. I spent the entire Sunday up in my attic, running Ethernet cables through the insulation. I mounted 4K resolution cameras on every corner of my roofline. I installed motion sensor floodlights. I set up a digital perimeter that would send an instant alert to my phone if anyone crossed my property line. My house was officially a fortress. The retaliation for my police report was petty and swift. Over the next 2 weeks, I woke up to find my heavy-duty mailbox smashed with a baseball bat. Another morning, my newly planted front garden beds were completely trampled, the flowers ripped out by the roots. I did not confront them. I simply pulled the high-definition footage from my new cameras. The video clearly showed a hooded figure matching Bradley's exact height and build swinging the bat in the dead of night. I downloaded the clips, backed them up to my secure cloud server, and forwarded them to the police detective assigned to my vandalism case. I was building a towering mountain of evidence. But as I spent hours reviewing the camera footage, my analytical brain started picking up on anomalies. I started paying close attention to the daytime footage when Bradley or my parents would slowly drive past my house to monitor me. I zoomed in on Bradley's luxury SUV. The tires were completely bald, practically racing slicks. The registration sticker on his license plate was expired by 6 months. I looked at footage of Brenda from the day they broke into my house. She was carrying a designer handbag, but the leather was cracked, and she was wearing a sweater that looked faded and worn out. I remembered Bradley's Facebook posts from the previous summer, bragging about a lavish 2-week vacation to Europe they were planning. That trip never happened. I fired up my laptop and accessed the state's public business registry. Bradley had always claimed to be the CEO of a highly successful commercial real estate and construction firm. I searched for his limited liability company. The status flashed on my screen in bright red text, suspended. Tax delinquency. I dug deeper into the county permit database. Bradley's company had not pulled a single building permit or filed a project plan in over 2 years. I leaned back in my office chair, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The puzzle pieces were suddenly snapping together. The frantic demands for my house. The unannounced visits with a cheap contractor to estimate demolition costs. The refusal to pay a simple $3,500 auto body bill. This was not just about Bradley being the entitled golden child who wanted a bigger house. This was about financial desperation. The grand illusion of Bradley's wealth was collapsing, and they were desperately trying to use my fully paid-off property as a life raft to keep his sinking ship afloat. The absolute confirmation of their desperation came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk at the IT firm, deep into debugging a massive server log, when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a local corporate number. I assumed it was a vendor and answered it with my standard professional greeting. "Hello, is this Calvin speaking?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded strictly business, carrying the polite but exhausted tone of a corporate desk worker. "Speaking. How can I help you?" "Hi Calvin, my name is Sarah. I am a mortgage underwriter with First National Bank. We are currently processing a cash-out refinance application, and I am calling to verify some discrepancies regarding the secondary collateral listed on the file. I need to confirm your primary residence address." A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. Secondary collateral? I am sorry, I have not applied for any loans or refinancing. My property is fully paid off. There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of furious keyboard typing. "Yes, sir, our records show the title is clear. However, your property is listed as an asset under a family trust that is being used to secure a 6-figure refinance loan. The primary applicants on the file are Clifford and Barbara." The air in my office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. The room tilted slightly. My parents. My own flesh and blood. They were trying to leverage my house, the house I bled for, the house I worked 60-hour weeks for 15 years to buy, as collateral for a massive bank loan. My IT training kicked in. Isolate the breach. Stop the data bleed. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice deathly serious. "I have no knowledge of this application. I am the sole, individual owner of that property. It is not part of any family trust. Whatever documents you have are unauthorized. I want a hard fraud alert placed on this application immediately. Sir, if you are stating you did not authorize this, I am required by federal law to flag this file for our fraud investigation unit, the underwriter said, her tones suddenly shifting to high alert. Flag it, I commanded. Flag it, freeze it, do whatever you have to do. Send me the fraud department's contact information. I will be pursuing this to the fullest extent of the law. I hung up the phone and stared at my computer screen. The betrayal was so profound, so astronomically evil, that I did not even feel anger at first. I just felt a terrifying, clinical clarity. They were not just toxic parents anymore. They were financial terrorists. And I was going to dismantle their entire operation. I immediately walked into my manager's office and took the rest of the week off using my accrued personal time. As soon as I got to my car, I called Dalton. I told him everything. Within 30 minutes, he was sitting in the passenger seat of my rental car, and we were driving straight to the county clerk's records office. The records office was a miserable, fluorescent-lit basement filled with dusty microfilm machines and clunky public access terminals. We sat down at a computer and began running property searches, using my parents' names and Bradley's name. What we uncovered over the next 3 hours was an absolute financial autopsy of my family's fake empire. Dalton pointed at the screen, tracing a line of data with his finger. Look at this, Calvin. Your parents bought their house 30 years ago. It should have been paid off a decade ago. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. They refinanced. Look at the date. 7 years ago, Clifford and Barbara had taken out a massive mortgage on their home. I cross-referenced the date with my memory. That was the exact same month Bradley opened his high-end sports bar, a vanity project that went bankrupt in 8 months. 4 years ago, there was another massive home equity line of credit taken out against their house. That coincided perfectly with Bradley's sudden launch into commercial real estate flipping, another venture that mysteriously vanished from his LinkedIn profile. And then, the most damning document of all. A notice of default had been filed against my parents' property by the bank exactly 30 days ago. They were over 6 months behind on their mortgage payments. The bank was initiating pre-foreclosure proceedings. My God, Dalton whispered, leaning back in his chair. They bled themselves dry. They mortgaged their entire retirement, their entire lives, to fund Bradley's delusions of grandeur. And now the bill is due. And instead of letting him fail, instead of facing the consequences, they decided to steal my house to bail him out, I said, printing out every single document we found. The stack of paper was thick and heavy. It was the physical weight of decades of favoritism, lies, and financial ruin. Having the public records was one thing, but I needed to see exactly how they attempted to steal my house. The next morning, armed with the fraud department contact information from the underwriter, I hired a ruthless, high-powered real estate fraud attorney named Rebecca. I paid her a $5,000 retainer on the spot and told her to subpoena the fraudulent loan application my parents had submitted. Because I was the registered owner of the property they were attempting to leverage, the bank's fraud unit complied. 2 days later, Rebecca called me into her office. She slid a manila folder across her polished mahogany desk. Calvin, I have seen some messy family disputes in my career, but the sheer, brazen stupidity of what your family attempted is staggering. I opened the folder. Inside was a document titled the Clifford and Barbara Family Trust. According to this piece of paper, my parents had placed all their assets into a trust, and they had included my property address as one of those assets. But it got worse. The next document was a quitclaim deed. It was a legal form attempting to transfer the deed of my house into the trust. At the bottom of the page was my name, and next to it was a signature. I stared at the blue ink. It was an incredibly poor forgery of my signature. It looked like someone had tried to trace it from an old birthday card. And right below my forged signature, on the line designated for the official witness, was a signature I recognized instantly. It was Brenda. My sister-in-law had signed her name, legally swearing that she had watched me sign over my property. They committed felony forgery, identity theft, and attempted mortgage fraud, Rebecca stated calmly, tapping her expensive pen on the desk. The federal minimum sentencing for this type of wire and bank fraud is severe. We have enough evidence here to send your parents and your sister-in-law to federal prison for a very long time. I looked at the forged signature. All the years of being told to sacrifice for Bradley, all the lectures about family loyalty, culminated in this. They were willing to destroy my credit, steal my sanctuary, and commit severe felonies, all to protect the golden child from the consequences of his own failures. Draft the criminal complaints, I told Rebecca, my voice steady and cold. Draft a comprehensive cease and desist letter outlining exactly what we have found. Prepare a civil lawsuit against Bradley for the car damage, and prepare the paperwork for a permanent restraining order against all of them. Rebecca smiled, a sharp, predatory look. Consider it done. How do you want to deliver the news? I am going to deliver it in person, I said, closing the folder. I think it is time for a family meeting. The invitation came exactly as I expected. On Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a mass group text message from my mother. It included my father, Bradley, Brenda, and my Aunt Beverly. The message read, "Family meeting at our house tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. Mandatory attendance. We are ending this ridiculous feud once and for all." I replied with a single word, confirmed. On Sunday at 2 o'clock sharp, I pulled my rental car into my parents' driveway. I grabbed the thick, heavy three-ring binder from the passenger seat. Inside was every printed text message, the police report for the car, the camera footage logs, the county foreclosure notices, and the forged trust documents. I walked through the front door without knocking. They were all seated around the large oak dining table. Clifford sat at the head, looking stern and authoritative. Barbara sat next to him, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, already practicing her victim routine. Bradley and Brenda sat across from them, looking incredibly smug, assuming they had finally pressured me into submission. Aunt Beverly was sitting in the corner, holding a cup of tea, ready to provide moral support to the abusers. "Sit down, Calvin," my father commanded, pointing to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. "I am glad you finally came to your senses." I did not sit down. I walked to the end of the table, lifted the heavy binder high in the air, and slammed it down onto the solid oak wood. The massive bang echoed through the room like a gunshot. Everyone flinched. "There will be no speeches today, Clifford," I said, my voice echoing off the walls. I opened the binder to the first tab. "I know everything." Bradley scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh, please. What is this, a presentation on why you are so selfish?" I ignored him and looked directly at my father. "I know about the 3 mortgages you took out over the last 10 years. I know about the massive home equity line of credit. I know that this house, the one we are standing in, is in pre-foreclosure and going to public auction in less than 60 days because you are 6 months behind on payments." The smug smirk vanished from Bradley's face instantly. He turned completely pale. My mother stopped her fake crying and let out a genuine, horrifying gasp. I flipped to the next tab, pulling out the bank documents. "And I know that you were so desperate to save yourselves from the financial ruin Bradley caused that you submitted a fraudulent loan application to First National Bank. I have copies of the fake family trust. I have copies of the quitclaim deed with my forged signature. And I have Brenda's signature acting as a witness to a felony." The silence in the dining room was absolute. It was the suffocating silence of total, devastating exposure. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. "Calvin, son, you do not understand. We were just trying to bridge a gap. We were going to pay the loan back. We just needed your equity temporarily to save Bradley's business." "Save what business?" I yelled, finally letting the anger bleed into my voice. "The suspended LLC? The company that has not pulled a permit in 2 years? You committed federal crimes to fund a ghost ship." Before anyone could respond, the front door swung open. Uncle Clark, my father's younger brother, walked into the foyer. He was a quiet, no-nonsense accountant who had always kept his distance from our immediate family drama. Today, his face was red with absolute fury. I got your frantic voicemail asking for another bridge loan, Clifford. Uncle Clark practically spat the words as he walked into the dining room. He glared at Bradley with pure disgust. But after Calvin called me this morning and told me to look at my own books, I realized I am never seeing my money again. My mother put her hands over her face, beginning to sob uncontrollably. Uncle Clark threw a stack of promissory notes onto the table next to my binder. Bradley has been running a family Ponzi scheme for 5 years. He borrowed $20,000 from me, claiming it was for payroll. He borrowed $30,000 from Aunt Beverly. He took money from the cousins. Over $85,000 siphoned out of this family to fund his leased luxury cars and fake lifestyle. And you, Clifford, you knew about it and covered for him. Aunt Beverly dropped her teacup. It shattered on the floor. She stared at Bradley in horror. You told me that money was a secure investment in a commercial plaza, she screamed at him. The system had completely crashed. The Golden Child's firewall was destroyed, and the malware was exposed for everyone to see. Bradley stood up, his hands shaking, looking around the room like a cornered rat. I had cash flow issues. The market turned against me. I was going to pay everyone back. Shut up, I commanded, my voice slicing through the chaos. I looked at my parents, then at Bradley and Brenda. I have my attorney on speed dial. I have 2 options for you. Option 1. I walk out of here, call the police, and hand over the evidence of your mortgage fraud and forgery. You will go to federal prison. The bank will seize everything. They stared at me, trembling. What is option 2? My mother whispered through her tears. Option 2, I said, closing the binder. You sign a legally binding agreement admitting to the forgery, which my lawyer will hold as leverage. You pay the $3,500 for my car damages. And you disappear from my life. Completely and permanently. No calls, no texts, no holidays, no funerals. You are dead to me. They took option 2. They had no other choice. Faced with the reality of federal prison, the grand illusion of the family legacy evaporated. The fallout over the next 6 months was absolute and brutal. Without my house to use as collateral, my parents could not stop the bank. Their house, the family home I grew up in, was foreclosed upon and sold at a public auction. They had to move into a cramped, cheap apartment on the bad side of town. Uncle Clark and Aunt Beverly banded together and sued Bradley for the stolen money. Faced with insurmountable debt and multiple lawsuits, Bradley was forced to file Chapter 7 bankruptcy. 2 months after the bankruptcy was finalized, Brenda filed for divorce, taking Carter and moving to another state. I kept my promise. I did not press criminal charges for the mortgage fraud. However, I followed through with my civil suit for the vandalism to my Dodge Dart. A judge ordered Bradley to pay me the $3,500 plus my legal fees. Furthermore, the judge granted me a permanent restraining order against my parents, Bradley, and Brenda. My life returned to the peaceful, logical system I had built. I got a promotion at work. I finished landscaping my backyard. The Dodge Dart looked beautiful with its fresh, flawless paint job. The last time I ever saw my brother was on a rainy Tuesday evening, 8 months after the confrontation. I was walking out of my office building, heading toward my car, when I saw Bradley standing near the edge of the parking garage. He looked terrible. He was soaking wet, wearing a cheap jacket, looking 10 years older. He saw me and took a step forward, raising his hands in a pleading gesture. Calvin, please. Just 5 minutes. Mom and Dad are struggling to pay rent. I am sleeping on a friend's couch. We just need $10,000 to get back on our feet. You are doing so well. We are family. I stopped and looked at him. I looked at the man who had taken everything from our parents, the man who tried to steal my sanctuary, the man who let his child destroy my property and laughed about it. I searched my heart for any lingering shred of familial obligation, any drop of sympathy or guilt. I found absolutely nothing. My emotional ledger was perfectly balanced. You were violating a court-ordered restraining order, Bradley, I said calmly, pulling my keys from my pocket. If you do not turn around and walk away right now, I am calling security and having you arrested. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and despair. For the first time in his life, his golden privilege meant nothing. He lowered his head, turned around, and walked away into the rain. I got into my restored Dodge Dart. I turned the key, listening to the deep, powerful roar of the V8 engine. I put the car in drive and drove out of the garage, heading toward my home, my sanctuary, leaving the wreckage of their lives in the rearview mirror forever. So, Reddit, I have to ask, am I wrong for letting them lose everything they had and completely cutting them off? Or should I have sacrificed my own financial security to bail my parents out and save the family name? Let me know down in the comments. I'll be reading them. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button to support the channel and catch more stories like this.